started. Thank you for coming. This is going to be the first time we're doing this large a panel, and we want to do sort of brief introduction of each of us and then take questions from you. The thing that gets challenging about questions in an event like this is that everybody's got their stories to tell, and we wish we had time to listen to everybody's stories. But if we can talk more in generalities about experiences that you've had, that would really help us move forward. The purpose, really, the target that we wanted to get to today is about collaboration. Back in March, I did a presentation at the California Speech and Hearing Association called IEEs, Dancing Between the Flames. And what we did, it was just for speech and language therapists, but we were talking about how clinical speech and language therapists can work collaboratively with academic speech and language therapists. And that's really what we wanted to promote in this talk today, is not the problems that we have at IEPs, but how can we talk to each other and get each other heard. So as parents and also as providers, what is the language that we can use and how can we really effectively make the strongest IEPs possible? So that's my purpose. I don't know what these guys are. So very first is Jill Weckerly.
Hi everybody. I am a clinical psychologist and I work in the San Diego County area primarily as an independent education evaluator for a lot of the districts in the county.
I think,
Yep.
watch this again.
Hello? Okay. I didn't want to blast your ears out. So I primarily do neuropsychological assessment and psychological assessment, and I work with a lot of school districts, and I'm also on staff at San Diego Unified and the Mental Health Resource Center, doing somewhat different duties, kind of more psychiatrically based. So I have had, I guess, plenty of experiences in IEPs, both from like being a representative of the district at times to my own private practice where I'm an independent practitioner. And I work with just all kinds of disabilities. As a neuropsychologist, of course, we primarily work with kids who have some sort of neurological issue, and that could be, specifically defined as like something like seizures or maybe recovering from cancer, to things that are more prevalent like learning disabilities and ADHD, mood disorders, that kind of thing. Do you want me to say something else, or
No,
that's my basic bio?
Whatever you want to say.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I think that's my basic background, and then I think we'll come around to.
Yeah, that's really what we wanted to do today, is be able to get you a little bit about us and then hear from you. Oh, Seth.
My name's Seth Schwartz. I'm a special education attorney. I'm the managing partner at the law offices of Schwartz and Story. All of our attorneys in our office handle special education matters. Many of you I notice and have seen in the office. I say that because a lot of what we do is consult with families on understanding where their rights begin and how to navigate the IEP process. Anybody who's met with me will understand that I always take a collaborative approach. I'm very into helping parents understand what their rights are so that they can smooth out the process, work better with the IEP team, and hopefully resolve the problem without getting an attorney involved. A lot of times that just means having somebody support them like an advocate to help them navigate some of the language or the special needs that maybe they don't understand about, or just learn as they go along. So you'll hear as we go along today that I'm going to talk a lot probably about how to use some of the legal rights to understand how to smooth out the process in terms of time, how you can get things done quicker, how you can focus on issues, document things that are going on, and really push for the services that are needed and differentiate with the battles that you probably need to let go of so that the team and you can work effectively together.
And Cynthia.
Hi, I'm Dr. Cynthia Norell, and in the past I had an agency that dealt primarily with autism and the autism spectrum, but I have currently started something new called Trio Consultants, and there's three of us. There's a young man on the spectrum who helps with social coaching. I do educational advocacy. We're doing work with helping individuals on the spectrum and with hidden disabilities get jobs and stay employed. I'm an author. I wrote Quirky Yes, Hopeless No, and now I'm working on another book about the quirkiness in the workforce. And I'm here today to just talk a little bit about, I've gone to IEP meetings for over 30 years because I started as a school psychologist 30 years ago, 1987. But recently, in doing more of the advocacy and not going as just the expert, if there is such a thing, but going in more as kind of the advocate, there's a couple of things that I've noticed, and it falls along the lines of what Karen wanted us to talk about today with the collaboration, and that is attitude is everything. And we all hear that, we all know that, but it really is everything in that meeting. And a lot of what I'm seeing is how to work with some of the defenses that are there, in particular towards parents, but also to remember that the teacher is an important part of the collaboration process. And there's this new little thing that I've noticed the districts like to send out ahead of time, and that's to excuse the teachers from the meeting. And I think I'm going to be known as the educational consultant that refuses to excuse the general ed teachers. I think they're an important part of the meeting. They're a legal part of the meeting. But the other piece is, many times I turn to the teacher and I say, what do you think about this goal? What do you think about this idea in your classroom? And I've actually had teachers say, can I help write the goals? So I think that that's a really important part of the collaboration. The next thing that I know that we all need to do when we go into a meeting is not just talking, but listening, and that's often the hardest thing to do in the collaborative process because we have something we want to say, myself included. And I've learned that it's really good to write the things down that you want to say and know when is the best time to try to interrupt or ask that question. I do not think there is a dumb question in the meeting, and I really encourage parents to ask questions. I think about it, it's kind of interesting. You walk into this meeting that's supposed to be collaborative, and yet everybody's sitting at the table. There's sometimes a seat for you, and you walk in, and it must be, even myself, a parent of children who had IEPs when they were younger, it has to be so overwhelming at times just to sit down in that process. And then you said, oh, and you're an important part of the team. And I think, yes, you are an important part of the team, and I want us to remember that as we talk about this today. Thank you.
I've made your list, so I don't, now it's there. Ethan.
Ron, will I be out of the shot if I stand? Because I'm conscious now. I bet none of you can see us over here. You're good. Okay. All right, I'm Ethan Marcus. I'm a certified family law specialist. So when the biggest barrier to collaboration is the other parent, and many children have more than one parent, the people end up coming to me. So real quickly about my background, there's a slide that says it, but I'll just go over it quickly. So a certified family law specialist is someone who is not just an attorney licensed in the state of California, but who has been certified as an expert in family law. But we, in our firm, go a little bit beyond that. We actually focus on custody issues involving kids with special needs. I do hold 3 teaching credentials. I don't want to fool anybody. I can't go back to school and teach. Those credentials are long expired, but they are in Spanish, chemistry, physics, general science, and in mathematics. I was involved with a bilingual charter school. I think you may have noticed as you went around the hall, a lot of people have started organizations or become involved in things because they couldn't find services for their own children, so they established them themselves. So that's kind of what I did. I wanted my son to be exposed to bilingual Hebrew and English, and so we founded a school way too late for him to get the benefit of it, but the school is there, and it's called Kavod Elementary. I've done presentations like this, and I've appeared on radio mainly because I'm trying to let people know that the conventional wisdom with regards to custody isn't true. That judges will always go for shared custody because they don't know anything else. Let me explain something about how family court works. It's essentially like college, like university. Oh, never mind, all right. Are you going to go back to?
If it's on university.
Okay.
Or you want to go down?
No, we can do the university. That's fine. All right.
The key word is university.
So imagine a university where you only have one student and all the teachers come and teach the student. That's court, right? You have your judge, and then you have to get a whole bunch of people, like people in this panel. In fact, out of this panel of 7, 3 of these organizations have provided experts for things that I have to do. So, and they have to teach the judge the most important thing. Some of you here, I know, are in custody disputes, and a lot of you think that the simplest thing to do is go before the court, explain why you're the more involved parent, and then you'll have custody. And that's actually not true. So very quickly, I'll just tell you how a judge sees things. Sure. So if you prove that you are 3 times the parent the other parent is, the judge thinks this: 3 times the parent, 1 time the parent, put them together, and I've got 4 times the parent. Joint custody. So the first thing you have to show is that in your particular special needs case, the judge has to pick. Now, once again, I'm the last stop, the last resort, because I'm where you come to when the biggest barrier to collaboration is the other parent. So we have to get the judge to understand that we have to pick. So that means one of these other experts have to show what happens when more than one parent has educational rights, more than one parent has medical rights, more than one parent has significant time with the kid that prevents a consistent approach with regards to the child's education. Once the judge understands that the judge has to pick, and believe me, that's the last thing the judge wants to do, then you can prove who the better parent is. And that's where I get involved. And then once you get past that barrier, then you're back into the IEP, and hopefully you are now in a situation where you can better organize your team, which now is the team slide. I'm going to go back to. So as Dr. Norral said, the most important member of the team is you. You put the team together, and in fact, that's what you guys are doing here now, right? You're looking for people that can be on your team that can assist you in the IEP environment. So that's my contribution. Thanks.
And April.
Hi, everyone. My name's April Villafana. I'm mother to an amazing 6.5-year-old little girl with Down syndrome, Isabella, and she was also diagnosed with ADHD, and she's had various health concerns, including open heart surgery. I also have a 2-year-old, Emma, and she's great. She also has hypotonia, low muscle tone, and motor delays where she receives therapies for. I work in North County, San Diego, and advocate for children with special needs and disabilities. Some of my services specialize in the application process for IHSS, in-home supportive services, early intervention IFSPs, and special education IEP advocacy services. From my perspective as a parent, very important to go into every IEP meeting with really a collaborative team approach. Especially because the IEP team members work with your child every day. They're the professionals personally in contact with your little one. The IEP is the foundation for the individualized education that the team is going to develop, and you are an important member of that IEP team. Mom and Dad, you are the IEP team professionals, you know the most of your child. Always approach the meeting with that collaborative mindset. In general, so of course there's exceptions, but in general, the teachers, the therapists, the administrators, they do care about your child. They became educated to go into this field for a reason. And again, in generally, it's important to remember that they want the best for him or her. I always like to use statements like, how do you think we can work together to make this happen? How can we facilitate that open conversation? I recommend never going to an IEP meeting alone. Some people say, well, of course you say that you're an advocate, you want people to hire you, and no, you don't have to hire an advocate for every IEP meeting, but don't go alone. Bring your spouse, bring someone familiar with the child, like a babysitter, bring a friend, bring a family member, grandma, grandpa, the child's private behavioral consultant, BCBA, ABA provider, the child's private speech therapist, occupational therapist. You can invite your child's regional center service coordinator to the meeting, or of course you can retain an advocate. So just don't go alone. You should always let the district know in advance that you invited someone, another professional or a friend or family member to collaborate on the team. Let the district know who you're bringing to the meeting prior to the meeting so that there's not a surprise. As a parent, it is important to learn as much as possible to have this collaboration and be able to prepare in advance for the IEP meeting. You can increase your knowledge to be an active, collaborative, prepared member of your child's IEP team. Conferences such as today involved Exceptional Parents Day are great. You can join local organizations. We have lots of examples at the resource fair today, and make friends with other parents who have children with special needs, various disabilities, or your own child's disabilities. That really helps too. Last but not least, if the district says no to a request, so you're requesting something specific and they say no, it is important to really think about, does my child really need the service? Is what I'm requesting reasonable? If it's needed, think about that. And think about what the district's argument is when saying they're denying the service. If you decide that the district's arguments are reasonable, at this time, you can revisit it at another time. You don't always have to do something or feel pressured you have to do something at that meeting. Again, most IEP teams do want to help the child. Prior to an IEP meeting, you always have, the possibility of consulting with an attorney or advocate. Prior to the consultation with the attorney or advocate, or really at any time, you can request your child's educational records, which I recommend. And in California, the district or school needs to provide the records within 5 business days. Reviewing the records will help you feel prepared, which will help you participate, which will help you be a collaborative parent.
I am Karen Searcy, and I'm a speech and language pathologist and have been one since the beginning of mankind. That's what it feels like. I've been working in the field since the 70s, and I've seen a lot of changes over these years, and things have been evolving into something different. And I think what was so interesting to me about putting this panel together, and I really appreciate that everybody is saying the same thing, it's the collaborative piece that we are all looking for. There seems to be a lot of animosity on one side or the other, and we can mend that. And so I took my slides that I use when I'm teaching at San Diego State or when I'm teaching continuing education courses, and I tried to flip them around to do it from the perspective of the parents instead of, like I typically do, from the perspective of speech and language therapist. One of the things that I focus on is how can we strengthen the therapist-parent communication? And it can be the teacher and parent communication. And one of the things that we have to do is start reframing our focus. So if we go in with certain thought bubbles in our heads, that's going to dictate the whole thing that Cynthia was talking about, that attitude. Our attitude is going to be negative if we already have these negative thoughts. When I teach this to speech and language therapists, there are different thought bubbles, you can imagine. But this is what sometimes parents are thinking. They're not going to listen to me. And if we go in immediately with all of those negative thoughts, that's not going to really promote the collaboration. And one of the things that we talk about are what are the questions that parents have about the therapy that they're getting. And what I like my students to do is something I'd like families to do as well. Think about what's going to make the situation worse and what might make it better, and try to focus on the column that's going to make it better. So in the case of a therapist, if a therapist tells parents that I'm only going to follow evidence-based practices and what you're telling me to do is not really in the best interest of my child, that's not going to make the situation better. That's not how a parent is going to listen to that therapist, right? Is that something that you want a parent saying to you when you're asking them about the efficacy of a certain approach? But what might be better is to ask the parent to write down 5 areas they would like the therapy to target on and what they might think would work for each area. So that's how the collaboration starts to get together, because we're listening to each other, and that was another one of Cynthia's slides. Listen and talk. But don't go in saying, I want to hear it this way, I want to try this, but think in collaborative terms. one of the things we do is talk about collaborative language, and if we switch everything from the pronouns, first person pronouns, to the collaborative pronouns of we, or I wonder what we can do, instead of this is what I want you to do, you're going to have a lot better listening pattern develop. Sometimes a family will come in and ask, will my daughter speak in paragraphs within 2 months? And I've had that question asked quite a few times. And then what the therapist hears is, can you guarantee success? But that's not maybe what the parent meant. What the parent wants to know is, can I keep my hope alive? If the therapist says it hears something different, then the therapist's response could be, I wish I had a crystal ball, which seems very flippant, doesn't it? If you have a therapist, and I'm sure some of you have heard a therapist say, yeah, I wish I had a crystal ball and could guarantee you your child's going to talk in 2 months. But really what's going to help is a list of progressive steps toward development. And the reason I've got this slide here is because a lot of times when you as a parent ask a question at an IEP meeting, the rest of the IEP team may not be hearing what you're saying. So you want to get clarity. You want to make sure that they heard what you're asking instead of going straight to the attack. Does that make sense? Yes. And then another part that I really like to talk about is collaborate on goals. And what I really love is if I'm coming in as an outside therapist and I sit down with the collaborative team, I sometimes have a speech and language therapist from the district who will say, can you help me write this goal? Can we work on this goal together? I've had resource teachers sit down and say, can you help me with this goal? Then you've got a really collaborative team. So if you've got somebody from the outside coming in with you as part of the team, ask them to work together. And even better is if you can get them to work collaboratively before the meeting, to actually get on the phone and talk to each other. We talk to speech and language therapists in the school districts quite a bit before the meeting. So it really helps set the tone, and the tone has to be that collaboration. And this is just an example, and this is in your handout, of what we are looking for in SMART goals. We want them to be specific, we want them to be measurable, we want them to be reasonable, realistic, and attainable. We want them to be relevant or functional, and they've got to be timely. And those are what we call SMART goals. And now we've got Maura, and what happened to your history? All about you.
Oh, well, how about we just go to the kids picture? That's probably about.
Okay. And then I'll go back to the rest of your.
Hi, I'm Maura Albritton. I want to do an audience participation question. How many of you have a child in San Diego Unified School District? Oh, my people. So my first thing, selfishly, is to invite you to consider coming to a community advisory committee for special education meeting, or checking out our webpage, or getting involved at your local school site. So I want to put that little blurb out there ahead of time. Who I am is up there. I have absolutely no reason to be up on this dais except for the fact that I have 5 children that have various needs, and they have 6 different eligibility categories if we want to do statistics. They've attended over 20 schools amongst them, and I am a Navy spouse, so most of the time I do what I'm calling solo parenting. It's like being a single parent, but I have all the joy and responsibility of marriage. So, thank you for laughing. My husband wouldn't have. So, I'm totally changing my slides, by the way. They're all absolutely.
And I have to apologize to the slide with your information on it about you.
Oh, don't worry about it.
But on the last page, you
Just think she was funny, and she wants you to come to the CAC.
and she's got information on the back page.
So when I think in one of our emails back and forth, I had written something to the effect of, if you took all of my children and lined them up, I've been doing this 88 years. Which is why I'm so old and weary around the edges. But when I was trying to come up with collaborative ideas, I went a few different directions, but really the lady down there in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, totally a different cat, totally a different way of advocating, totally different. And so what I hope I have a chance to share with you later is what I've learned and what I do totally differently. So, and then I just want to say 4 quick things, sorry. One is that I really approach IEPs looking at, I have some things about me that are certainly quirky, and so I try to work with the team in advance so that they know what they're walking into and what my needs are in terms of us having a very productive relationship. But I also try to spend a little time considering what kind of accommodations I need to be ready to give to the staff. So there's always a teacher, especially in secondary school, there's going to be a teacher who totally wants nothing to do with that IEP. If your child's in general ed, they will act. And so really like peeling back the onion and saying, what do I need to do to make this experience meaningful and important and like beneficial to that teacher? Like, how am I going to lure them into my son's or my daughter's world? Sorry, I'm trying to make it really quick. So that idea that we all have special factors maybe in the meeting that we need to be using. And then 3 things. These are my like battle cries. 1, eliminating jargon from that stupid IEP meeting as much as possible. Number 2, and I'm with you, that focus on general education. If I do a public service announcement right now, if you have a child who is diploma bound and you hear the words applied, modified, functional, there's a few other words, those are the biggies. If you hear those words describing classes that they want to put your child into, you need to ask questions. How is that going to affect my child's ability to get a diploma? Because I can tell you it does. And so that's my one little current thing I'm worrying about. And then the other thing is just no surprises. The biggest barrier to collaboration to me is when somebody walks to the table and somebody surprises them. All of a sudden, all the good work is gone. So anyway, I'll be quiet.
No, I like this one. You're going to do this one.
Oh.
Advocating like a marathoner?
Yes, marathon. The finish line is farther than you think.
And that ends our talks. We are all part of the IEP team, and we have to remember that we all have the common focus, which is getting the best programming for our children. And that's the attitude to go into when you go to the IEP. So now what we want to do is just take questions, and I will be running to everybody with the microphone. Anybody? Or maybe I'm not. There, I got it. Anybody have a question to start? Where?
Middle.
Okay. Come on over here. I think anybody who has a question, if you want to come toward this way, it'll be the easiest.
I have the question for Karen Lewis. So my son is 6-year-old and he has severe speech and language delay. And the goals in the IEP so far I have seen, they are like very limited in the areas that are really going to be meaningful when he deals with his general ed peers and like in the real world. So my question is like, what are your suggestions to write meaningful speech goals?
That's a good question. You want to make sure that they're functional. So where is he now and where do you want him to be next? And are you talking about social language or his comprehension of language or his expression or his speech production?
So receptive and like social interaction.
Okay, so receptive language and social interaction. So if social interaction is one of the goals, then you do want him in some group therapy because you want to develop that interaction between peers. And you want to make sure that it's got very measurable focus. And I think the measurable piece is what I often see missing on the goals. If it's not measurable, then it's not really a goal. And if it's got too many variables in it, like receptively understand and use expressive language, that would have too many variables. You have to have one goal for receptive and one for expressive. Same thing for the social pragmatic. What my concern with the social pragmatic piece is, a lot of times schools or even therapists and clinics will make that very broad and make a child do things that just aren't natural for that child. So for social pragmatic language, we can teach the child the rules, but he doesn't really care about it. We've got to go first find the motivation and then develop that social pragmatic. You're welcome. Somebody else? Oh, good. Think of questions, everybody.
My son, he has 15 goals and RIPs in 3 weeks, and he only met one goal. So did we wrote the goals wrong, or how should I approach the service providers? Because I've seen great progress, especially in speech, but the goals were not met. So do we need to rewrite the goals? Should we keep the goals? What would be the best approach?
Who wants it? Seth.
I think I'll answer this question. I think to give you a better understanding of sort of how I think about answering that question, you have to understand sort of the fundamental underpinning, which is that last year when they set the goals, they had to come up with reasonable ideas of what your child would learn within that year time span based on what they knew about your child or what they should have known about your child. And if they had done that right, they're legally protected even if your son doesn't make progress, because they wouldn't know if it's the teacher or your son's disability that's interfering with the progress. So if I was going into an IEP meeting and trying to figure out how do we find out what went wrong, I'd be asking a lot of questions. Did we set these goals too high? What was the impediment to the progress? Did they make progress for half the year but not the second half of the year, for instance? Did we have enough service to work on these goals throughout the year? Would we have seen more progress if we had a half an hour extra of that service during that period of time? Because one of the missing components is you don't know why your son hasn't made progress throughout this school year, and you're going to need to establish what happened. It's all across the board, all 15 goals, you've got one goal that they've met, I struggle to ask what's wrong with the program. That would be my first inclination. So if you have some ideas, for instance, if you think the classroom's too big, you might want to ask a question such as, is the classroom itself interfering with our ability to serve his needs? And so from there, I would say record your IEP meeting, give 24 hours advance notice in writing, and you want to find out what's going on here. Then I think you need to step back from that IEP meeting and really consider whether or not they had set the goals properly from the get-go, or if something was wrong with what we call implementation of the program itself. Because that'll tell you what you need to do now in terms of either replanning or considering how to address something that might have gone wrong during that year.
Before I ask the rest of the people on the panel, what I want to say again is that attitude matters. So when Seth said, gives 24 hours notice about recording, you can record and not be contentious. It's how you ask those questions. It's how you state you're going to do something. If you come in and say, I'm going to be recording this, that's pretty argumentative. That's pretty much stirring everybody up. But if you said, sometimes I'm sitting in these meetings and I can't remember what we've said during them, I'm just going to record it so I can listen to it later. And that's true. A lot of times we say things and we forget what we've said or what other people have said. And it's the attitude that matters. And I think we've got another answer.
Well, I was going to add to that with the audio recording. I just say, I always audio record, but you do need to provide the 24 notice in writing before every meeting. But get into the habit of it. I don't see it as a negative thing, and the meeting might go great, and then you have an audio recording of a great collaborative meeting, or otherwise you might regret not recording.
2 questions. One is piggybacking on the audio recording. If you didn't give a 24-hour notice prior, is it inadmissible if you need to use it?
It's not a question about admissibility or inadmissibility. It's a question about whether or not the other team members need to let you record. So if, for instance, everybody said, sure, we're okay with recording, then you could start the recording up, say the date, say, I didn't give 24 hours notice, but everybody here is in agreement to record. Get that on tape, and then you should be able to proceed with the recording. Otherwise, they can just say, no, you can't record. Some parents have, taken tactics like, I just don't feel like meeting today unless we can record. I don't recommend that because we're talking about how to work together. So, at that point, you probably want to be as concise as possible, take notes that you can. You really do want to work with a team because these are people that can do way more for you than they're legally required to. For instance, if they were legally required to provide a half an hour of speech a week, they could give you an hour and a half. There's no reason, except for their assessments, that they could back it down to 30 because that's what's appropriate. They could always do more. So you want to keep these relationships high.
I know that the topic is working collaboratively, and I agree, but my son's case manager, I don't care for her. She's withheld data, and it's really difficult to work collaboratively. What can I do? Either can I get rid of her? It's so late in the year, I don't want to. We've come to a lot of strides as of late, but at the same time, I feel like she's a little bit sneaky and not very resourceful in her field, to be honest.
So you still need to be extremely nice to your IEP because there is a concept, of cooperation in the law, and it's often characterized as parent non-cooperation, and it can dictate the results of a complaint. For instance, you may have something that you have a true and genuine issue about, and parental non-cooperation is a reason a judge could say, look, we're just not going to hold the district responsible for that. So you always want to look like the more reasonable person in the room. So even though you probably want to say a lot of interesting things to this person, you probably want to thank them for their time, ask them for documentation, ask them for reasons, play dumb, ask smart questions is something I say a lot. You really want to be asking a lot of questions because information in your hand is how you're going to be able to advocate for your child. The frustration of not getting data, the question then becomes, what's an educational record? They do have to give you educational records, but some things aren't educational records, which is a longer conversation. So, which I'm sure all of us will be here afterwards if you want to ask questions.
Can you ever ask for a case manager to switch out?
You can, and if you have a good relationship with the IEP team, they may do that. It really depends, and sometimes if you're really contentious, which I don't recommend you are, they may switch that person out just to get out of the way. So, but it is their choice because they get to make administrative decisions. So it's so important to remember that they get to choose a location, they get to choose a curriculum, they get to choose their staff, unless you can come up with a stellar reason why not.
I just want to add on to that. I have actually gotten a change in the case manager, but I've done it by talking to the administrator outside of the meeting, and I have presented it as I wanted to be able to say this just isn't the right person, but I presented it as in what's going to be best for that individual. And it goes to my last slide that I didn't get to talk about, in that I have actually stated this in meetings, when things start getting a bit defensive, this is not about defending your opinion. This is about this individual. And I haven't had to say that to a parent, but I've had to say it to a member of a team. We're not here to defend this. What we're here to do is to work for this individual. So when I talked to the administrator outside of the meeting about changing the case manager, I said, I'm concerned about this individual and what might be best for the individual. So when you put it back on that, like Karen was saying earlier, we talk about we in the meeting, but a lot of times we have to remember the I in the room is the individual, and that's the child or the student.
Hi. First of all, I'm from Pendleton, so we're in North County, and I'm just going to give a shout out to Oceanside Unified because they have been absolutely incredible with our IEP process. And I'm new to the process, so I hear all these horror stories about IEP meetings and collaborating, and I personally never experienced that. And so, to be totally honest with you, I sometimes feel like I'm missing something. Like, is there I guess an IEP checklist or something that I am not aware of? And because I've had such a really good experience, would it still be beneficial to have an advocate or an attorney or something like that come with me to the meeting?
How old is your child?
3.5. Well, they are. I have 2.
Oh, you've got
Sit down.
Well, first of all, congratulations. Many advocates offer a free consultation. I can't speak for everybody, but you know, it's not hard to find someone good that would help you take a look at the IEP.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Would it be, because I would never want to come across as aggressive or contentious or any of the bad words that have been used. Is it going to be, and I'm sure you're all lovely people, but would it come across as aggressive to have someone join me, even though I've had a wonderful experience so far? I know I'm a newbie.
I would say that's the best time to have somebody join you.
Yeah.
is
Okay.
I like that age group.
Right.
But I think we go back to what April said, which is, I don't know that it's a time to like go and hire somebody. I think it's a time to, if you want somebody to take a peek, there's lots of people available to take a peek at an IEP. But I think most of us were kind of like, oh, 3.5, of course. That's a totally different, I don't know how you would call it. It's a different experience when you are in
So I
the
have
early
like a whole
childhood.
bunch of
special
years of that coming.
Not necessarily,
necessarily.
but it's different.
Okay.
When I talk about attitude is everything, what I see is it really depends upon that situation at that moment. So, and it often depends upon, for the kinds of kids that my population, my people, are the hidden disability. I mean, autism and the high spectrum of the high functioning side of the spectrum. I often hate even having to say that, but that the side of the spectrum where they have the communication ability, okay? But I also work with those that have attention deficit disorders and some other things that we call the hidden disability. You wouldn't know that they have that, right? And oftentimes what I see in the meeting is and this is why I like that gen ed teacher so much, is it's all about the attitude of that gen ed teacher. So I was in a meeting recently up in Long Beach where it was a little girl with attending issues and some learning disabilities, and the teacher just kept saying, but I don't see the disability. I don't understand the disconnect because she can do it in the one-on-one and she can't do it in the group. And I went, that's the disability. That's what we're talking about. And I had to be careful about the way I said it because I wanted to be really not kind, but I had to say, that is exactly what we're talking about with a disability. And then I said to myself, and unfortunately, this is not going to be the best teacher for this little girl. Luckily, we're at the end, getting close to the end of the year, because it hasn't been because she couldn't see me. So for me, that's where it gets to that attitude, and it's about that piece of it. Sometimes in the meeting, the defensive people are the ones that are a bit more defensive, are feeling that, it's kind of like what Karen was saying, they're feeling like you're asking them something that they can't really answer and they don't know how to answer it, okay? And it would be nice if in that meeting we could just say, you know what, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm married to a man that's about to retire of 30 years of teaching kindergarten and has been a teacher for many years, and we have a difference of opinion sometimes, but oftentimes what I say to him is, it is about the attitude that the teacher brings into the meeting. It really is. And for the educators, it doesn't have to necessarily be that they have an answer every single time.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Ted.
I just wanted to say a couple of general things about IEP meetings and parents, and just to say that I think it's a kind of, for many people, it's an inherently emotional process to go into an IEP. You're dealing with not only just the stressors of having a kid, period, but you're also dealing with stressors of the challenges that come along with your child's disability, and so just to kind of keep that in mind, that it's sort of a naturally it can get you riled up. And so first I would say, please take care of yourselves, because that's something that's going to help you kind of no matter what, help your kid and help you in an IEP. And then I think this was getting back to what April was saying, like sometimes that's where bringing another person along can really help in terms of just keeping you regulated. And just in the big picture, the better regulated you are, kind of like the more you can think and advocate for your child. But I guess as a professional, I wouldn't want you all to think like that. I think that's a piece of cake. I think there are some really challenging things that happen from your standpoint in working with schools and the frustration, and to keep that in mind and give yourself space to be emotional, but maybe just not in the IEP.
One important thing, maybe, and you'll like hearing this, if you do statistics on this, the problems aren't as bad as you're going to hear them from people. There are 32,000 kids with special needs roughly in the San Diego County. If you divided that by 50 advocates or so that are actually working professionally in this field, that's 600 clients that they would have and 1.6 IEP meetings a day. That doesn't happen. There are not that many people that need help, but when you go to the people that are doing the help, you're going to hear about the problems because those are the people helping with the problems. And I don't see 32,000 people in my office every year, and I often don't see people come back. And there is a lot of good stuff happening out there, but you're not going to hear about it from the people who are going in there and playing cleanup.
I think the measure of a good question is if you can get every panelist to chime in. So I heard someone say that the best time is while you're still on great terms with the whole team. And I don't know who said that, but I think it was Karen actually.
No, Maura.
I think it was Maura.
But I'll take the credit.
And that's actually correct because you don't know what information you're missing unless you go get it. You don't know if just because everything is fine in the IEP in terms of attitude, if you're getting all the services that your child needs. So yeah, now's the time, because if you wait until something seems not right and then you show up with an advocate or an attorney, then it is confrontational. It's not just here's the person who's here, who's advising me or who's giving me moral support. So now's the time. And let me tell you, Seth's exactly right. Most of the cases don't go down this road, but here's how it can. It's the first time someone who's been in your position gets surprised, where everything has been fine for a whole bunch of years, and you go into the IEP and someone makes a suggestion that doesn't seem to make sense or goes and takes a left turn. And if at that point you give into the temptation of going confrontational because you have been surprised, oftentimes the confrontation will breed confrontation. And because people are no longer hearing the words that are being said, I love the slide from Karen where it talks about you say one thing but something else is heard. Once it goes down that road, it can get very serious. I mean, I have seen cases where it's gotten as far as the child had to be pulled out of that particular school because the entire school was aligned against the child. And they all took the stand and said so. And it was even worse than that, because when the child was moved out of school but within the same district, the principal of the school became the director of special ed. So it wasn't until leaving the entire district that the problem was solved. But did it have to get to that point? You know, you never know that for sure, but the best way to avoid that, which most people we hope can, and that's the whole point of this conference, is that at the very earliest stages you get as much information as possible. If you're worried about seeming confrontational, if you're doing it at that early stage, that's when it's not confrontational. And you make sure things are on the right track early. You come in with the right attitude with lots of advice as to how to speak the language of the correct attitude so that what you're saying is not perceived as hostile, and so that they have every opportunity to give the services your kid needs.
Okay, we have a question over here, and I see you up front. I promise I'll get to you.
Hi. So I've heard this being mentioned in another session as well, in San Diego, that we've actually experienced it ourselves recently as well. You guys mentioned, well, I forgot who mentioned it, but about teachers excusing themselves from the meeting. We've experienced that, and we thought it was weird too, but now we're beginning to realize it's an even bigger problem than we thought it was. So have you guys been able to pinpoint why exactly they excuse themselves from a meeting? How should we feel about that, and what can we do about it?
I can tell you that one reason is because it's a personnel issue, because they have to have the substitute to cover the classroom if the teacher is out of the room. And I think that also, I think it's a myriad of, I'd actually like to hear some other opinions, but I think it's a myriad of things that go on. I think there's a personnel issue covering, I think in the one I was in just the other day in a high school in Poway, it's like, oh, guess what? It's time for this teacher to have lunch, and they, by contract, they have to go to lunch right now. well, okay, so we planned this IEP meeting during the teacher's lunch. That probably wasn't a good idea. I think what I have seen kind of coming back, because I attended a lot of IEP meetings as the expert and consultant, and now I'm kind of coming into this role of kind of standing there and saying, no, actually, we are going to have a teacher. What I have seen is that more and more of just kind of, well, let's get that excusal in and see if the parent even questions it. So I'd like to hear some other opinions from Seth and April on that.
Besides personnel issue, lack of poor scheduling. They'll schedule the meeting, 8 to 9, and then there's still half the meeting, but this admin has students waiting and this teacher has to get to class, and or they'll want everybody, just do your part. The OT is going to do their part, the speech is going to do their part. Well, no, wait a minute, we haven't talked about goals, services, what if the parent has questions? They'll give you a meeting notice, and some districts put the time, 8 a.m., and some put a time period, 8 to 9:30 or 8 to 10. So you feel free to write a note. Is this enough time to allow all team members to attend the entirety of the meeting?
So, if they hand you an excusal form in an IEP meeting asking if somebody can go early, don't sign it. I mean, that person's there, they're telling you that if you sign it, they're going to go, and if you don't sign it, they're going to go anyways, maybe? I just say don't sign it if you don't want the person to leave. But, from a legal standpoint, that gets a little tricky because that document's kind of worthless. It's great for the waiver for them because they can show it and say, hey, we're not legally responsible for that person. But the law is pretty clear that they have to have a general education teacher if the child might be in gen ed for any reason at all. So if the child's only going to be in a special day class or a non-public school and there's no chance they're going to be in a regular gen ed class or in gen ed activities, they don't need a gen ed teacher there. And the gen ed teacher can ironically be the special ed teacher. And they also have to have an administrator who can also be the special ed teacher who could be a general ed teacher, and you could have a meeting with one person in it. So it gets a little wonky when you start looking at the sort of totality of that question. What's really important is, why is the person there? What do they have to contribute? And so if somebody did an OT report or a psych report, they have to have somebody who can interpret the report and present the results. It doesn't have to be the person that did it, because that person might get in a car accident on the way to school, and they still need somebody in the meeting who can interpret the new report. So they have a lot of leeway and a lot of gray area, but what they don't have a lot of leeway and gray area for is the information they have to provide to develop present levels and determine whether accommodations, modifications, or goals are necessary. So if you have a reason somebody needs to be there, you need to say why. I don't want to let the OT go because they need to talk about accommodations that we might talk about when we get to the 10th goal. We don't want to let the speech pathologist go because we haven't talked about inclusion on the schoolyard or in a class at the end of the day. The gen ed teacher is important because the gen ed teacher is seeing the behaviors, and we haven't got to the behavior intervention plan. That's the way you keep people in your team.
I'm going to dovetail. I don't know if your child is in secondary school, but certainly that's when I see it go really cattywampus, where you have like this parade of people and they're tagging the next one out to go relieve. And so what I've tended to do for my own and people that I support is really pick and choose. If there's 2 teachers, math and English, that you really need to be there, or if your child's having all these behavioral problems in science, like that's the general ed teacher I'm going to die on the mountain to get in the room. And everybody else, feel free to, put your input in writing to everybody so that we all see the exact same thing. And I'm happy to excuse, the PE teacher or whoever. But really, like, if the topic is collaboration, it's where am I willing to give and where am I not willing to give, and being really clear that this is the person I need there, and there's no substitute for that person that can speak to with individual knowledge of my child.
And I just want to say, as a speech and language pathologist, when I'm in an IEP meeting, I want to be there for the entirety of the meeting, because I learn things when the occupational therapist is talking, when the physical therapist is talking, if there is one, when the teacher's talking. And that's part of the collaboration. We can help craft much stronger goals if we listen to each other.
I have a question. I wanted to see how aggressive will be looked if I take the advocate the first meeting, my daughter has 2 years old, so she's gonna go to school at 3. If I take the advocate the first time, the first meeting, how am I gonna do? Because right now we have a process and
I just have to say, you're only going to look as aggressive as your advocate. So pick somebody that represents you as a person. Pick somebody that you feel good about, and pick someone nice.
I already have one.
Thank you. He was very nice.
You have a question, right? Oh, this is the...
Thank you. So my question is about, we had a mom that she was saying that they made the goals for the child and he didn't met except one. And but mom is saying that he's doing a lot of improvement, or she. Mine is opposite. I see that they have the goals, and I see that when we have the IEP meeting or the benchmark, they say that he met and he met and he met, and I don't see that. So how can we approach that and being collaborative at the same time? And as far as I talk about measurable goals, I see it's not measurable, but I don't see those things that, for example, they say he's able to jump with 2 feet. Private OT doesn't see that, mom doesn't see it. So how can I work with the school that doesn't, yes, please.
I'm all about if you can get the team to write in the goals. We have technology these days, and I'm all about, could you send me a video clip? A video clip or a photo or whatever. No other child needs to be present. I'm not trying to invade your, personal space, but we've never seen it. What were the prompts you gave? Could you just take us through that? The private OT would love to see it. I'm super excited about this reported progress.
Right.
Show me.
And another thing, they're saying that what we see in a school setting is very different from what you see outside the home. And under the parent concern, I'm always asking, how can I generalize these skills at home and in the public? Because what you guys seeing, I don't see that at all at home. And my second question is that, maybe that's a good question for you, Seth, is that regression. Since they see that the goals been met, they're saying that he's not qualified for ESY, the summer school, because he met the goal and he did not make any regression. And how can we fight that?
A lot of questions in there.
I know.
Let me just tell you about a style of case that comes into our office every once in a while. And it's where they report progress on goals because the district thinks that it's the only way they're legally protected. So the team, to show that the child's doing well, reports things that the child doesn't actually do because it's aligned with the goal. 2 years later, that child can do all these great things on paper, but they can't actually do it. They've regressed because today they can't do what they were capable of at the last time they developed the IEP. Even though technically they haven't regressed, they just haven't progressed over the years. That's a problem for school districts. I don't have a good answer on how to address that, but you're going to need assessments probably, and you're going to need more data from the IEP team, which is a deeper question of how to get it. The other question about ESY is that ESY, legally speaking, you look to see if a child's going to regress more than a typically developing child over the course of the summer, and therefore would need some extra time to work on the goals and things that they have during the program. That is not simply based on progress on goals. Obviously, you could have a child that met all of their goals during the school year and then regresses over the summer. So that question also is harder to answer because it requires history and other information.
I just wanted to add on to what Maura was saying. It's such a great idea to ask, and it's in that attitude, in that tone of, I'm so excited that he's made this progress in school, can you show me a videotape? We also do the reverse. If a parent is seeing something at home or a behavior at home or that he can't jump at home, videotape that and share that. It goes both ways.
Yeah.
I'm one here and then I'll come back to that.
So can a family develop and maintain a collaborative and positive relationship with the new IEP team at a new school when the previous IEP team at a different school, same school district, the family had a very bad and ugly relationship because in our world everyone talks. So what are your thoughts and comments on that?
I'm going to start the answer. It's those thought bubbles again. So you're going in there or that family's going in there and having this negative experience. It's almost like post-traumatic stress, right? Because you thought you were going in collaboratively and you got shut down. It's almost like having to start with empty thought bubbles and go in there and pretend that, I mean, you can go in and prove that that last team really wasn't right in the stories that they're telling, that you're not that person that they described.
I think about it like similar to the mom who had the question of, you know, her child is going to be 3. It's a fresh start. Look at it optimistically.
But do you think, I guess my question is, do you think that the new team at the new school, at the same school district, will give the family a chance?
Yes.
Can I, as somebody who may have been not well thought of in my past life, previous life, like I literally have been heard, well, now I sound like my daughter. I have been heard to tell a team, please go forward and tell people how nice I am now. You know, like just like acknowledge it. Like I know that you may not have heard great things and I am like going to be on my very best. I'm going to do my best. Like I'm all about if they say to you, if they look like deer in the headlights when you walk through the door, you know, and just like, hey, didn't have the greatest experience, but we are here to have the best. Like, I'm good. This is a new start. I don't know. I don't mean to sound Pollyanna, but it's possible.
I also think that, you know, sometimes the problem isn't you, right? Sometimes it's a really difficult personality that, you know, was in the previous IE team. And even if they've talked, the new people will like experience you and say like, wow, gosh, this is nothing like, you know, what so-and-so said. And you have a different dynamic because you have different people and those people are not so defensive or, you know, don't have a chip on their shoulder or whatever it is. So I think even if people talk, often, you know, if the new team is comprised of people who are reasonable, you can have a reasonable relationship.
So the short answer to your question is yes. The longer answer is the whole purpose of this particular panel, which is as much as you'd like to, you can't control the entire IEP team. And as collaborative as you might be in your attitude, you may encounter obstacles where people are less collaborative. And Mara came up with the greatest approach, which is focus on what the data show. Ask them to show it, and eventually the data will steer the meeting in the right direction, even if people's attitudes aren't there. But the main focus of the message that we're bringing you is make sure you're not the one bringing the lack of collaboration to the table. And it increases the odds that collaboration will occur because you do have at least control of the part that you're bringing. But you heard the story I told earlier. It can get quite extreme. But as Karen says, don't assume that that's where it's going. Give it every chance first, kind but strong. And when I heard, say, you know, pick the advocate that reflects your personality and reflects the attitude that you want to present, that's exactly right. You want to show that you're very well informed, that you have ideas as to what's best for your child, and give them every opportunity to get on board with that. And don't give them so many opportunities to be on defense. That's the best you can do. Beyond that, you just have to focus on what your child needs.
I think I'd like to add one thing to that, not putting the other members of the team on the defense. I was at an IEP meeting recently, and the advocate asked me a question, and the school district speech and language therapist started to answer it, and the advocate said, I was asking the professional. That did not set the tone right. I wanted to leave. Right. And I've got a question, I have a few questions here.
Hi, good evening. I have a question. Well, when a child has already a diagnostic of cerebral palsy, and you went to the meeting of the IEP, and the therapist, the occupational therapist, when she was she aspirated, and when I was in the meeting, she says that she never see the child aspirated, and that's recorded in Children's Hospital. So right now she's being sent to a normal regular school and not being able to enroll her in school. In, I don't know, besides the IEP group, who can help so she can have the technician or the people can help my daughter. She's 3.5 years old, and I come from the district of Chula Vista.
I think one of the questions that she had, what you'd said to me also, is how do we go back and amend the IEP?
So you'll have to forgive me because I can only hear little bits and pieces of sort of the fact pattern that leads you to where you're at. But what I can tell you is if a doctor is recommending something, and they are required to reach out to that doctor and find out what the treatment plan is, regardless of whether they see that necessarily in the school. If they see it in the school, they absolutely certainly have to address that, because they have to address the needs of the child that arise regardless of the disability category or diagnosis. But your particular situation, what you're asking, I believe you asked about aspiration, and they're not seeing that. I'm guessing there's a history, so there's some more facts that need to be there. There's probably some data that needs to go to the school. There's some conversations they need to have with professionals outside of the school so they understand that safety need. So that's about as close to an answer as I can get with the limited information.
And you can call another IEP at any time to get the team back and to review the doctor's instructions.
And sort of just to take this back actually to our collaborative theme, one of the things that school districts don't always have is information. Now they have an obligation to go get information, but they don't always have your information. They might not have that OT report. They might not have the doctor's phone numbers or an exchange of information. So one of the most collaborative things you can do is get all that information together and make sure they have everything. Give it to them by email and just say, hey, I want you to have this. I want to sign those exchanges of information to talk with these people. I'd like to facilitate your phone calls with them if it'll help you. Anything you want, I'll take care of it.
So she's in a general ed school, and all that, they have all that information already, but it seems like it's time to bring the team back together and ask why, or tell them they need to follow all those things. They've got to follow through, and to show you they made the phone call on such and such a date, record all the details.
It sounds like the student might also qualify for a health care plan.
I think she was asking about that. How to get an aid for that.
How do you get that?
This may be borderline actually a legal question about whether you have an issue that needs a certain type of help. So I think if you don't mind, maybe talk to one of the advocates or one of the attorneys. I'm not the only attorney here. Anybody here would be happy to speak with you about it.
I have a question. My IEP is scheduled for 2 p.m. What if it goes beyond like when their contracted hours are? I think they're done at 3:30 or something. Do we do an extension if I want it to go longer?
I'd recommend now sending a quick email. I noticed you scheduled the IEP for 2 p.m. Does anyone on the team member have any time restrictions that they have to end the IEP meeting at? And if so, I would like to request all team members to be present for the duration of the meeting.
So that's where to go like earlier?
Or ask that the team can stay later if you're going to ask if they all can stay, and if they can't, then you end the meeting, but you don't sign anything, and you say we need to schedule a second meeting.
One of the problems is there's no legal basis for the amount of time an IEP meeting must be. So, but one thing we know is that if you request another one, they have 30 days to hold that meeting. So a lot of times it's interpreted as we'll do an hour, we'll meet in 30 days and do an hour, we'll meet in 30 days and do an hour. Obviously that delays the services, which is counterintuitive to what the IDEA, the law that we follow, is really looking to do, which is ensure that the planning is done in a timely manner. So what April is recommending is that you document first that you've acknowledged that it's going to take more time, and usually it's going to, more than an hour, and that you're asking them whether or not their staff is going to be available to stick it out. And then if that happens, where they say we can only do an hour, I would say, well, we would really like to have that IEP the very next day so we can continue the IEP meeting. If you have a triannual, it's probably reasonable to think 3 hours. An IEP is probably an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's not uncommon for a complex triannual to last 5 hours over the course of a couple days. So you do need to start thinking when you email them about a notice that you receive is whether it's enough time, and then you have to document stuff. Because unfortunately, in this, what we're saying is a collaborative process, it doesn't always seem collaborative when you get the response from the other side. So you just want to document everything.
And I just want to add, I often see where then at the meeting, if they're not able to finish it, then we make a date for the next one, and it isn't necessarily 30 days. I'm on my 3rd meeting on one of my clients, and we've already had 2 almost 3-hour meetings. So, and it's just, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of information, there's been some extra assessments that are in there, and they've been very willing to, okay, let's look at the next date when we can get this. So that sometimes will happen too. So it doesn't mean you just get that hour and a half.
Thank you so much for all the wonderful information. I have 2 questions. The first one is, can you talk a little bit about related services? My daughter used to have like 2 hours of PT, and as unfortunately her disorder is progressing, and she's not, her physical abilities are declining, and so they're telling me that PT and OT are just related services, and she's pretty much, they want to go to consult time now. And my second question is, can you get more tips about how to, as parents, take care of ourselves and before coming to a meeting? Thank you.
But so your question about moving to consult services, the OT and PT, and their reasoning sounds like they're saying your child cannot progress with these services if they're direct or group because there's regressing in her abilities. Is that right? Am I understanding that?
She's over here.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you were over there just a second.
Yeah, pretty much. Like she's not able to walk anymore. So why are we gonna? We're just gonna teach the staff that works with her so she can.
So
they can do
the first right answer, my opinion, Bard, is that you have professionals that need to weigh in on this about what your daughter can and can't do. And my second impression of it is that's probably not true, that the information doesn't sound reasonable. And secondary, even if it's true, that doesn't mean your daughter doesn't have things to work on. They're just different. And so my best estimate is that advice to move to consult only is a lack of information that would guide the team properly.
So you're saying to bring in outside assessors?
You're going to need something or somebody to help guide you in that situation, because the team has one opinion, and their opinion essentially is we can't help with direct or group services, we can only help with consult. And just to be fair, I would say, well, what is it you're trying to help with consult? Why can't that be helped with group or individual service? And why can't we go further? There's some problems in just, logically understanding why they would do that, given what you're saying. But there's some missing information, which means that the team is probably also missing information. You shouldn't have to be obligated as parents to answer the questions sometimes that you're obligated to answer. Coming from my point of view, I think that's really hard on families. But you are sort of charged with this information-driven system to bring something to the table to show that what you're asking for is valid. You can ask the district to do assessments in PT and OT. You have a right to challenge their assessment if you think that they did it improperly and get somebody else to do it independently. There's some strategy there that we can't completely discuss, and you can do all this collaboratively. But the most collaborative thing you can do is get all that outside information together, get another opinion, and bring it to the team and ask them, why aren't we addressing this? All right.
I have another, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say something about the second part of your question, which involves caretaking, and you know, your situation sounds very stressful and difficult, and you know, I think talking this out with someone is often helpful and trying to, you know, process those emotions, whether it's with a therapist or a friend or like a parent support group is a great, can be a great resource in that sense, because it's really important that you have a chance to process what's going on.
And recommend, scheduling time for yourself. So just how our kids have a crazy calendar, OT, PT, speech, ABA, behavior. We need to, you know, gym, date night, mommy night, spa.
Mimosa
relax,
breakfast.
mimosa breakfast, and it's yeah, very busy week, and you know, but it's priorities, right? And everything in life, it's hard, but you have to make time for making time for yourself too.
A lot of people here probably qualify for respite, either through a regional center or getting it privately. And I know there's a lot of parent support groups here and some nonprofits that have everything from whether it be talk therapy to massage to some other break, and a lot of it at very, very reasonable rates. A lot of times it's even volunteers are working at people who are parents just like yourself who are giving back after their kids have grown. So look for those groups that are going to support you.
I have another question, but it's going to have to be translated into English. I'll do the Spanish.
Buenas tardes. ¿Puedo añadir un goal al IEP?
Can I add a goal to the IEP?
Yes.
Yes.
¿Qué sucede si el distrito no lo quiere poner?
What happens if the district doesn't want to add the goal?
If it's an area of need, then you have the right to request that it be added to the IEP. And then I think, again, in the collaborative model, I would want to know what are some of their reasons that they don't believe that the goal is the appropriate goal. Do they think that it needs to be written in a different way? And so asking the question, what about the goal? What can we do to change the goal that would make it be what you feel is more appropriate?
Ok, gracias. Y la última pregunta. Si mi hijo está mis 3 hijos están con un diagnóstico, yo lo entrego al distrito y el distrito pone otro tipo de deshabilidad. ¿Mis hijos están recibiendo lo necesario?
So if my 3 children have a diagnosis, but the school district is not, that diagnosis is not reflected in the IEP. Are my children receiving the services that they require, that they need to receive?
So,
there's 3 of them.
So generally speaking, a diagnosis does not equal eligibility. You can have eligibility for an IEP without a specific diagnosis, even though you say qualify under, say, autism, but you don't have an autism diagnosis. If you have a diagnosis, they have a requirement to assess to see if that specific issue is an educational concern. Once a child qualifies for an IEP, though, the category itself does not matter. The only thing that matters is that they're addressing all of the needs across the board.
Any other questions? Oh. Again.
Thank you for taking my same question. So this is a question for the panel, specifically maybe Dr. Norrell can answer this question regarding our young kids, like the kindergarten, first grade level. What are your thoughts, pros and cons about giving them like the gift of an extra year, like in kindergarten or first grade, to give them the gift of time to grow and develop? Is that ultimately a parent decision, or is it an IEP?
It should be an IEP team decision. You know, it's an interesting question that you bring up because we changed when kids enter kindergarten in the last few years. So they have to have their birthday by September 1st. So that kind of changed some of the, more of the willingness to do the retentions. To me, it's a case-by-case basis. It depends upon the child, and it depends upon the reason for giving them the gift of the year. And I have had situations where districts have wanted to retain, and the child had an IEP, and they were doing the whole retention process outside of the IEP process, and you can't do that. So it needs to be done within that IEP process. So I don't know about some of the districts down here, but a district up in LA has like a whole different team that handles retentions. And so those meetings need to include people from the IEP. But if your question is, what is my opinion on giving the time of a year, the gift of a year, it just really depends on what your reasons are for that.
I can speak loudly if you want.
We need to have you, sorry, videotape it.
Hi, my son's been diagnosed with autism, so he has an assessment next month with the school district. Would it be helpful if I requested his chart or his information from his OT, his ABA, and his speech therapist before the assessment and send it to my case manager at the district? Or should I wait till the assessment and then do it if I get the IEP meeting? What do you guys suggest?
Give them everything you got. Like literally, the form that you sign for an assessment plan has a box usually and a little line that says, do you have any new information that we should consider? You do. You should absolutely give it to them because it'll, yeah, and if you, just as a caveat to that though, sometimes parents don't want to give information that's protected mental health or they feel is private and protected by HIPAA. Judicially speaking, from a legal perspective, that argument doesn't stand very well. So if you have that problem, if the reason you don't want to give something is you're worried about the legal effect, just go see an attorney. But if you don't have that question in your mind, you should absolutely give them what they need to assess the needs appropriately.
I think that we're talking about collaboration. That's part of the collaborative process, is sharing all the information, exchanging all the information, so everybody knows what should be factored in. And it's really difficult when we don't have all the information from the beginning.
And Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the assessments the private therapists may have done probably have some type of a testing protocols that it can't be reassessed within 12 months, for example. So really you're doing the best thing sharing that information, because that will probably have the district-related service provider determine which assessments they want to.
That's a really important point, because you don't want the school to be doing the same testing that your private speech and language therapist was doing within a 3-month period, because one of the, they're going to cancel each other out.
Okay.
Got another question here, and I think we've got about 5 more minutes.
That's okay. That's okay. She said.
My daughter has no real social issues, but she's developmentally delayed. She loves kids, but she needs to learn in a small environment. She's currently in a special day class, but does some push-in with gen ed. Least restrictive environment. Is it better to have the social aspect of a gen ed with an aide to help with one-on-one academic instruction, or to be in that special day class where it's all small, one-on-one, 2-to-1 ratio for academic instruction with a little push-in gen ed with the social aspect?
That's a hard one to answer without, the full, situation,
Yeah,
but
but
just in
generally.
general, yeah. I don't think that there's a wrong or right answer. I think it depends a lot of times, especially with younger kids, like what parents, kind of value. Like I have many parents with autism where they're really concerned about social progress, and they kind of prioritize that more so than, than the academics. And then I have some parents who are kind of the reverse. And I think, with really young, obviously we try to address everything, but sometimes I think it's reasonable to have kind of a preference more so than the one over the other. But some of it would depend on what kind of issues your child has. So for example, if you have a young child especially who's really sensitive to a lot of noise and commotion going on, or has really severe attention issues, sometimes the aid is not necessarily going to bridge that gap, right? And it is better to stay in the special ed. They'll get better instruction if they're in a quieter environment. So I think it just depends on what's being proposed as far as the inclusion in the general ed class. Like, what are we trying? Are our goals for that inclusion mainly social, or are they academic? And if they're academic, are there any characteristics of the child that might limit their ability to receive the instruction reasonably, and that an aide may not be able to, fully deliver the instruction?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I just did an observation in a classroom where the families had really fought to get the child completely included, and he wasn't, because he couldn't interact with the children in the gen ed classroom. He could only interact with the aide, and the aide wasn't trained, nor was the teacher trained on how to get him engaged. So his only response was to his aide. He never really focused at all on what the gen ed teacher was saying, and there was no interactive play. So I think it's got to be a case-by-case decision, and I think you have to make sure that the entire team, including the gen ed teacher, understand what your child needs.
And it doesn't always have to be one or the other. In general, if a student, can be mainstreamed in a special education class, and they're mainstreamed in general ed, a lot of times the schools will say, oh, well, mainstream for music, library, recess, lunch, more the specials or but you can always collaborate and advocate for more inclusion, more mainstreaming academically too, and then still have a student in a special education class for part of the day, or the things they need. It doesn't have to always be one or the other.
We've got 3 minutes, and I've got everybody has a question now. So I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get to everything.
Can I just talk while you're walking?
Yes.
One quick thing is just to, I'm sorry, while you're waiting for the microphone. I would be remiss if I didn't say, though, children that are put in separate settings in elementary school by well-intentioned teams, that what we see later on is that they did not have the exposure to the general education curriculum that is necessary for them to be able to do the mainstreaming later. Like there's a point in it, you're nodding your head, and people make decisions like behavior and safety and all these things, but ultimately if your child is potentially a diploma-bound child, you really have to think about that academic instruction coming from the general education teacher who knows how to teach the subject matter.
What if they won't let a child come in to the general education academically because they have an intellectual disability?
Talk to Joyce, right? Serious.
Because I got him in, pushed in, but just like you said, library, PE, and lunch. And I wanted more academic, and they said, well,
And you have a right to request more academic.
He said, they said he can't access the curriculum.
To be honest, that's probably, a lot may have to do with staffing, because some students have an aide, so to speak, all day, but if they need to hire an aide or remove an aide for, an hour here of academic, that's, the intellectual disabilities, no. The students, they learn so much from being around their typically developing non-disabled peers, learning alongside, meaning in a gen ed class.
But make sure that somebody comes and observes, because I've gone to high schools when students have been fully included, and their just physically there, they're not getting, and their needs.
Inclusion isn't thrown into a gen ed class with no service and no support, and it's not sitting in the corner with an aide working on modified that has nothing to do with anything.
And then I just want to throw one little wrinkle into this too, because I've been doing this for as long as I've been doing it, the life skill and the social, I think, is the most important. And I agree with what Mara was saying as well, that you have to look at kind of where you're going for the future. And then I have a hypothesis that I proved in doing a non-public school, and that is you really emphasize the social and the academics come, unless of course there's a learning disability or whatever, but when you really emphasize the social, the academics come.
Karen said I could say something.
Yes.
I'm Joyce Clark from the Exceptional Family Resource Center, but I'm a parent, and I have a 29-year-old son with significant intellectual disabilities, and we did go that inclusion route. It was not an all or nothing situation along the way, but I can tell you at age 29, in his current job as a courtesy clerk at Bonds, that it made a major difference, because a lot of the battle wounds we might have experienced or the give and take of things within the journey along the way paid off in terms of his ability to integrate into the world, because we don't live in parallel worlds. I know it's difficult, and I know there's not one answer for any one situation. That's why we have a continuum of options. But I really encourage you to not to lower your expectations, but to think creatively how you can access those accommodations to continue to build that general knowledge and the general education curriculum, because I think part of Luke's success in his friendships and his relationships and in his community, because he spent a lifetime building those relationships. And there were a lot of times where I drank a lot of wine at night, as everybody else probably in the room. But I think I just can't emphasize that enough. And we're hearing terms like universal design for learning and access. And while it's not in perfect play in each school district, we're going to see that evolution with technology, that individuals, those built-in accommodations will be more systemic. So I really encourage you parents to please continue to do the due diligence that all of our parents on the board and all of you in the room are doing.
I just got the stop sign. I know that some people still have some questions, so maybe you can come up and ask. Thank you so much for